Welcome, everyone, to the Relational Discipleship webinar. My name is Ebony Davis. I am a ministry researcher serving as Director of Research and Ministry Assessments for the youth worker community, and as a member of the Research Advisory Board for the 10 by 10 collaboration. I'm also a longtime youth pastor serving in a local multicultural church in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., for more than 20 years. And because of that, today's topic is deeply important to me. And I believe it's vital to anyone who cares about the faith resilience of young people. 10 by 10's vision is to make faith matter more for 10 million young people over the next 10 years, inspired by John 10:10. And this goal responds to research projecting that 10 million young people would drift away from the church over a decade. And so, one major way that 10 by 10 is addressing this challenge is by championing relational discipleship radically focused on Jesus in every faith community. And so last year, the 10 by 10 Research Advisory Board partnered with Future of Faith, led by Dr. Josh Packard and his team, to produce a white paper offering a comprehensive assessment of the current landscape of youth discipleship, especially the practice and the promise of relational ministry. And so this topic is so central to the future of youth ministry that it will also shape this year's Association of Youth Ministry Educators Conference. And that's happening on October 23rd through 25th in Dallas, Texas, where the white paper will be front and center. I am really excited to be conference chair this year, and I hope you are putting it on your calendar as we speak. And we are also really grateful to have Dr. Josh Packard and Brandon Wong from Future of Faith with us today. Josh is the co-founder of Future of Faith and the lead author of the Relational Discipleship White Paper, as well as the author of his new book, Faithful Futures: Sacred Tools for Engaging Younger Generations. And Brandon Wong is an associate researcher at Future of Faith and co-author of the white paper. So they're going to start us off. We're going to turn to Josh and Brandon for an overview of what they discovered through their research.
Wow, thank you so much, Ebony. That's such an incredible introduction, and what an honor to be on this panel. On this webinar with all of these amazing people who will show up in the panel later. As Ebony said, I'm the co-founder of Future of Faith, Josh Packard. This is Brandon Wong, and we were sort of leading up the efforts of Future of Faith on this white paper. And it was no small task. I mean, as Ebony said, it was commissioned, and Brandon, we thought this was going to be like, I don't know. Like I've been a professor, you've been a student. Like I thought we would do like a lit review and it would be like 10 to 12 pages or something. And it ended up being not that. It ended up being so much bigger. So one of the things that I think is really useful about the white paper as it ends up stretching to, to be more comprehensive than just sort of survey, is that there's some nearly 200 footnotes and hundreds of sources in the bibliography. So let's just start there before we get into the findings. Brandon, can you talk about, because this is largely the effort, the part of it that you were sort of tasked with before we knew how big it would be. Talk a little about how you pulled all of these resources together.
Yeah, so I think a big piece of this project that we started with was wanting to make sure that it was sort of drawing from a diverse constituency of scholars and other folks just in the world of youth ministry. And so to start, we launched this survey that mostly went to scholars and then sort of expanded beyond that as we learned about more people whose voices were worth including. And so that was where we started with the sources. We asked, like, what have been the most influential academic and otherwise sources in the world of youth ministry over the last 50 years. And so we sort of snowball sampled from that. We got more scholars, more sources. The database is now up to over 450 sources, and you can find that on our website. There will be links sort of here. And so, yeah, that's sort of how the database came together. And then obviously we drew on that in the white paper. So,
And I wouldn't normally start there. Like in a webinar about like the least interesting place to start is often with methods. But I think that it's so foundational to this story because one of the things that discovered, and part of the reason why it went from this initial scope of 10 to 15 pages up to what I think it ended up at 35 to 40 or something, is because we realized there was a story that wasn't being told. Like Brandon alluded to here, that this story had been about sort of youth ministry had been told, but in pieces, about youth ministry as a profession or youth ministry as a discipline or relational discipleship as a theology or concept. But bringing all that together, meant that we had to also model the way that we wanted it to move forward, and that was from a very diverse perspective. And so then the actual database, the bibliography becomes critically important. And as Brandon mentioned, if you're watching this and you're a scholar or a student or something, and you're looking for a place to start, you can go to our website. Brandon has done this great job of organizing all these into a table. Is it Notion, Brandon, it's in right now?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
database. Yeah.
And you can download it directly. But okay, so let's start with the sort of like, what did we find? We're not gonna go through like blow by blow through the white paper. You can download it, read it, it's free. But there are some things that I found to be particularly interesting and surprising to me as I was putting this together. So I come from the field of sociology, and we don't always get it diversity right. God knows. I mean, I don't want to make that claim, but I had sort of come into this with this idea that the scholarship around relational discipleship or relational ministry would be a bit more integrated. And one of the things that surprised me was that these perspectives still largely lived in silos, and that the history of this concept um, is one that sort of reflects the kind of history of inequality in the field, largely. That there are these incredibly useful, sort of more academic and professionalized strains. People like Mark Center had written textbooks that are foundational for a lot of this work. But then there's also this like incredible like lived tradition that is just now starting to make its way into sort of quote unquote official publications like academic journals that we had to uncover even through some sort of I guess really only came out in our interviews. So Brandon, you did a lot of those interviews. I mean, what did you learn by talking to people that we wouldn't have found just in a scan of literature?
Yeah, I think what you already touched on with the lived piece, I think is really key there. We interviewed a lot of different folks, and I'm grateful to have had the chance to speak with them. But I think about an interview that I had, and just basically the scholar was telling me sort of the journey of their career, and sort of interwoven in that is just the publications and research that came up along the way. And so I think what was valuable to me was getting the backstory that informed each of these publications, and how much um, youth ministry is not just sort of a field or line of work that people exist in, as much as it is for many people a calling. And with that, there's so much more to sort of these works than just what they're finding. And I think that was
Yeah.
really meaningful to see.
Same. And we cite those conversations as sources in the white paper themselves. We commissioned essays from people to help cover bases that we couldn't otherwise cover. And what we learned there is like a lot of this stuff that is sort of like professionalized in largely, I'll say, white context, academic context, although the academic doesn't exclusively mean white by any stretch. We're also like very much just a part of the regular lived tradition, almost impossible to separate out as a particular like strain of youth ministry, right? That these relational approaches were just embedded in indigenous communities, in Hispanic and Latino communities, right? In African American communities, where that was just the approach to ministry generally. And so that really expanded the kinds of places that we went and looked at, and we incorporated those into the draft of the white paper itself. The other thing that came out that stuck out to me, again, social scientist, right? So not my lane, was just how much theology there is, especially emerging, that underlies this. And we've got Kim Nolan here from Young Life, and Young Life is really a sort of pioneer in the parachurch world about sort of establishing its like inroads into a lot of these relational approaches. But this incarnational approach that you know. This idea that young people are not worthy for who they will become, but for who they are now, was such like an aha moment for me, that to find that body of work and to see it stretched out from Wes Ellis and Andy Root to Elizabeth Conde Frazier and Hosman Espino working in Catholic context, Latino context, like, and on and on. I mean, these are not the only ones, but that really gave me some like intellectual foothold into the theology of sort of why this relational approach is not just important tactically, but why this is sort of a sound theological place to start from. And then we jump into the model. Okay, so what do we find? Uh, we found there are sort of five key things here that we find support for. This is not going to be surprising for those of you who are in it, but we cover them blow by blow. Adults matter. Everybody's been saying this for forever. We find no reason to counter that in the literature. The adults matter in the lives of young people in a few ways. So having a significant parent or adult that's close to you matters, but also the adults in your community and in your families more broadly are critically important. That youth ministry in a relational way is not or should not be done. It is not the domain just of the youth minister. If your church is lucky enough to be able to support a youth minister partner full time, um, I think what the research points to is pretty clearly like that's not. You can't just sort of like put it over there and be like, oh, that's the youth minister's job, right, Brandon? And be like, okay, good, they got it. And we can pay attention to other things.
Yeah, I think that was something that came up in the interviews as well, just that youth ministry extends beyond sort of this professional sphere, and it really is something that happens in these sort of relationships between adults and youth that emerge organically. I think those seem to be sort of the most meaningful things, both on the parts of the adults and as well as the youth.
Indeed, but there were two. But all of that made sense to me, and I think it was pretty clear from the national studies that sociologists like me tend to consume. But there were two other parts that were surprising, and one was faith applied through service, and the other is the importance of internal spiritual practices. And as we dug more into it, I realized like I shouldn't have been surprised. It just wasn't a part of my domain, but it's nice to have them captured here. And in particular, it's this notion of faith applied through practices, which gets us a little bit into um, Dave Ron's work. He's one of the panelists that you'll hear from in a second too. This idea that relational discipleship is important not as like just not only as a tactic to rebuild trust in a world that doesn't trust institutions. I mean, it is useful for that, but it's relational discipleship with the eye towards being, to use Dave's words, radically focused on Jesus, right? That these internal spiritual practices become critical for their formation, and I think here too of Mike King's work at Youth Front that kids can handle this. Like they are interested in like these deeply theological conversations. That it doesn't have to be smoke machines and bands and compelling preaching. Although those things can be useful too, but it doesn't have to stop there. That the theology is really critical. Okay, so we'll just wrap up this part, Brandon. There's still a few things I think that are missing from this field. There's voices that are still kind of left out, and I'll name one of them. I'm curious if you have some others. So one of the things that stuck out to me was the way that like disability, neurodivergence, that is a whole conversation that the church doesn't seem. I mean, Aaron Rafferty and a few others are like having that conversation, but it's not like full on embraced yet, and we could do with more of that. What about you? What was left for you as a question or direction or a voice that isn't there yet?
Yeah, I think something that I think about is just youth voice. And I would be really curious to know, like, what is the experience of the youth, right? We have this very rich wealth of experience and knowledge from scholars, from adults, youth ministers themselves. But I think a really valuable and yet missing perspective here is what is the experience of the youth, whether it's the youth now or folks who have grown up and gone on to be sort of youth ministers or adults in churches. Yeah.
That's a really good point. To see more scholarship that is qualitative in nature, and using lots of different methods actually to incorporate youth voices. We do a lot of photo voice projects at Future Faith. That could be interesting. I hadn't even thought about that yet. Okay, great. Well, please do check out the white paper. We have this whole framing of like questions we started with and questions we still have. We'd love for you to take those up in your own work and scholarship. I mean, this seems like ready made for somebody who's either writing a term paper or even a master's or PhD thesis if this is of interest to you. So I'll invite Ebony back on, but you can find the white paper at our website at Future of Faith.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's an amazing paper. You guys did great work. So just want to really thank you for the work that you did. And as Josh was pointing out, this paper was always meant to be sort of a launching pad, right? It's not meant
Yeah.
to answer all of the questions. It just tells us what is out there.
Oh yeah,
And
we
so
talk about it as first word, not final word.
that's right.
Right.
First word,
Yeah.
not final. That exactly. And so as we think about, how we can use this paper to sort of launch either in our classrooms, in the conferences that we attend, this is really an ongoing work that all of us in the community need to come together so that we can make faith matter more for the young people that we're encountering. We hope that today's webinar encourages you and challenges your assumptions and equips you with a deeper vision for relational discipleship that is radically centered on Jesus and grounded in real relationships with young people. As a reminder, you can find the white paper at the Future of Faith website. And if this conversation sparks something in you, we want to invite you to continue exploring these themes at the Association of Youth Ministry Educators Conference, October 23rd through 25th in Dallas, Texas. The Relational Discipleship paper will be front and center, and we'll have extended opportunities to learn and collaborate and imagine together what's possible for the next generation. We would love to see you there. Thank you again for investing your time today, and most importantly, for investing in young people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and God bless.